Clark destroyed the Hoodlum gangbangers. Phoenix Mercury, led by DeWanna, the gang member Bonner.
Indianapolis was supposed to be just another routine win for the Fever that night. Fourth quarter, comfortable lead, everything under control, until suddenly it wasn't. Caitlin Clark gets tangled up with DeWanna Bonner, her own former teammate, the same woman who pushed her way out of Indiana not long ago after things turned sour behind closed doors. Within seconds, the entire building tips into chaos. Technical fouls start flying one after another. Players get separated by officials. Tempers boil over, and one player ends up ejected entirely. The referees seem to lose control of the game for what feels like an eternity, stretching the final quarter far longer than anyone expected. But buried underneath all that noise is something much bigger than a heated scuffle. Clark quietly set a WNBA record that same night, the kind of milestone that proves she is not just must-watch television, but someone actually rewriting what is possible at this level of the sport. Two enormous storylines collided in one single night, history and hostility unfolding side by side on the same court. And somehow both of them trace back to the same fractured relationship that has been simmering since last season. None of this happened by accident, and the layers behind it run deeper than most fans realize. So what actually happened between Clark and Bonner that made things explode like this in front of a sold-out crowd and live cameras catching every second of it? Was this purely a basketball play that got misread in the heat of the moment? Or is there a deeper history we are not fully seeing play out here? Why does Bonner still get this kind of intense reaction from Fever fans every single time she steps back onto that floor wearing a different jersey? And here is the question that really lingers long after the final buzzer. If Bonner left Indiana on such rocky terms, why does this rivalry keep following Clark right into her record-breaking moments, almost like the two storylines are permanently tangled together? Is the league quietly benefiting from this tension because it keeps people glued to their screens and talking about the game long after it ends? And maybe the biggest question of all is whether Clark actually needs rivalries like this one to keep climbing toward greatness, or whether the chaos is simply an unavoidable byproduct of how much pressure now surrounds her every move. By the time this video ends, you will know exactly which record Clark broke that night and why it matters far more than the highlight clips circulating online are giving it credit for. You will also understand what truly set off the tension with Bonner behind the scenes, long before the cameras ever started rolling on that fourth quarter collapse. We are walking through the full sequence of the confrontation play-by-play, unpacking the messy history between these two players going back to Bonner's exit from Indiana and everything that led up to it. We are also showing you why the league's response to the entire incident says more about the bigger picture than most people realize at first glance. You will walk away with a complete and clear picture of both sides of this story, the stat sheet and the storyline, and you will see exactly why the two can no longer be separated right now. But before we dive in, do you think Bonner's reaction to Clark was purely about basketball or about something personal that never actually got resolved between them? Let me know in the comments.
Save the day once again. Can't stop, won't stop. Caitlin Clark records, because we get down, baby. We get down. You can't stop the GOAT. It don't even matter when you try to go thug mode, gangbanger mode.
A commentator goes full hype mode here, praising Clark as untouchable and basically unstoppable, before turning around and torching the entire Mercury roster as thugs and hoodlums in the same breath. That kind of language is reckless, and you can feel the shift in tone the second it leaves his mouth. Calling Bonner and her teammates gangbanger mode for getting physical in a tied-up emotional fourth quarter has nothing to do with basketball analysis, and everything to do with lazy, loaded commentary that leans on stereotypes instead of substance. What he does get right, though, is the larger point buried underneath all that noise. The fourth quarter did stretch on far longer than it should have. The chaos did hurt the broadcast and disrupt the flow of what was otherwise a good game. Frustration boiling over when a team is losing is real, and it absolutely derails momentum on the floor. So you're left holding two conflicting truths at once, a fair critique of the chaos wrapped inside language that should never have been used to describe professional athletes losing their composure under pressure. Right away, you're probably asking yourself whether that kind of language would ever get used to describe a similar altercation in men's basketball, or whether it gets reserved specifically for moments exactly like this one. Was the commentator actually breaking down the basketball happening on the court, or just riding the wave of outrage because it generates clicks, reactions, and engagement faster than calm analysis ever could? Why does Bonner specifically keep becoming the face of every chaotic moment involving the Fever, even when multiple players from both teams are tangled up in the very same scuffle? And if the broadcast itself is openly calling the chaos bad for business, what does that actually reveal about how unprepared the league still is for moments this physical and this personal between former teammates? The deeper, more uncomfortable question creeping in is whether commentary like this actually fuels the rivalry even further, turning ordinary basketball tension into something uglier and more racially charged than it ever needed to be.
Stuff y'all pulled was bad for business. I'm telling you right now. That nonsense the Phoenix Mercury pulled was bad for business. It's bad TV. Y'all look like thugs out there. Y'all look like hoodlums out there. The fourth quarter took an hour long.
That kind of language would never survive in a broadcast covering a heated exchange in men's basketball. And you already know that without needing much convincing. Words carry real weight, and using them here exposes a double standard that still quietly follows women's sports commentary, especially when black athletes are the ones involved in the altercation getting described. The chaos itself, though, was completely real, and the broadcast wasn't entirely wrong about the optics surrounding it that night. Stretching a fourth quarter that long absolutely hurts the product, drags down the pacing, and tests the patience of anyone just trying to watch a competitive basketball game. Frustration boiling over when a team is losing has been a recurring pattern across the league all season long, and Phoenix wasn't the first team to let that frustration spill out physically. Bonner becomes the lightning rod here, partly because of her tangled history with Indiana, the way she left, and the reaction it sparked from fans, not simply because of one physical possession in the paint during a chaotic stretch of play. What you're watching is a collision of legitimate basketball tension and irresponsible framing happening at the exact same moment, layered right on top of each other until it becomes hard to separate one from the other. That tension only gets messier, louder, and more personal in the next clip.
Listen, DeWanna Bonner think they could go around doing whatever the hell they want. DeWanna Bonner, you already stole the money. You already stole the money last year. God damn, what else you want to do? It's crazy, man. This is crazy. This was prison. They was on the yard today. This was like prison basketball out there today. The stuff DeWanna Bonner, Alyssa Thomas, and the Phoenix Mercury was trying to do. The Phoenix Thugs is what we gonna call them from now on. Are y'all Crips and Bloods? What the hell is going on? What is going on?
This one tips from heated to genuinely harmful, and the line here needs to be drawn clearly and without hesitation. Comparing two professional athletes to gang members, calling a physical possession prison basketball, and throwing around terms like Crimson Bloods is not commentary in any real sense. It's an attempt to criminalize two women for playing aggressive basketball on national television in front of millions of viewers. That kind of language causes actual damage, and pretending otherwise to keep things neutral would be dishonest. Bringing Bonner's age into it and mocking her body on top of everything else adds an entirely separate layer of disrespect that has nothing to do with the game being played that night. What does land? Even buried underneath all that ugliness is the frustration about the broadcast itself. Kids were sitting in the stands. This aired live on national television. The game did spiral into something messy and genuinely hard to watch for long stretches of that fourth quarter. You're left watching legitimate, fair criticism about chaos and pacing get completely overshadowed by language that should never have made it anywhere near a national broadcast in the first place. That contrast raises questions you can't just shake off once the clip ends. Why does physical play involving Bonner and Thomas specifically get described using terms tied to gang violence and incarceration, when similar tangles and shoving matches happen across the league constantly without that kind of framing attached to them? Is this really about basketball at all, or is there something uglier, hiding just underneath the surface of all that outrage? Why does Bonner keep absorbing this level of personal, deeply ugly attack more than any other player who was actually involved in the same exact incident? And if commentary like this airs publicly and gets clipped, shared, and replayed across social media, what does that say about how comfortable certain corners of sports media still are with language like this when black women athletes are the ones being targeted? The bigger, more uncomfortable question lingering here is whether anyone in that broadcast booth actually paused for even a second to think about what they were saying before it went out live to a national audience.
Nasty product. unprofessional, bad TV. That was on national TV. Y'all got little girls and kids in the stands, and y'all out there acting like a bunch of damn hoodlums. You ought to be ashamed of yourselves. DeWanna Bonner, you 98 and a half years old. Your goddamn bones is aching, and you sitting over here acting like a hoodlum.
No, this isn't really about basketball, and you already sense that the moment you watch it play out in real time. Physical contact happens in nearly every WNBA game without sparking much controversy at all, but the language only escalates to this level when it's aimed at certain players, and that pattern becomes impossible to ignore once you actually start looking for it across different broadcasts and different incidents. Bonner becomes the focal point largely because of her tangled history with the Fever organization, and the way her exit was handled, but the criminal language used against her here crosses a line that has nothing to do with basketball history, rivalry, or anything that happened on the court that night. The frustration about a sloppy, chaotic broadcast stretching far too long is completely valid criticism, and plenty of fans share that exact frustration without needing to reach for ugly language to express it. The way it got expressed here is not valid, and conflating the two doesn't hold up under any real scrutiny once you actually separate them and look at each piece on its own. What you're watching is a pattern repeating and intensifying right in front of you. Frustration with on-court chaos curdling into language that targets identity instead of actual behavior on the floor. That same pattern gets even harder to ignore, and even more personal in what comes next. What started as a fourth-quarter scuffle turned into something much bigger once you actually pulled the layers apart. A genuine WNBA record buried under chaos, a rivalry rooted in real history between former teammates, and a broadcast that exposed how unprepared sports media still is for moments this physical and personal. The stat sheet says Clark made history that night. The storyline says the league's growing pains aren't just about pace of play. They're about how that history gets talked about once the cameras are rolling. And honestly, that gap between achievement and narrative might be the most telling thing about where this league is right now. If you want the full picture every time these two storylines collide again, and they will, subscribe so you don't miss how this rivalry keeps reshaping itself.